Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second in our series of Learn at Lunch sessions. Today we're starting our photography, looking at smartphone portraits, first of all, with Catriona. Um, please just make everybody aware that we are recording this, so if you have any questions, you can add them to the chat. But at the end, if you have questions and you want to speak, you can do, and we can edit that out if you just let us know. Um, The session will be around 30 minutes, again recorded, and we'll get that online as quickly as possible for everybody to follow along. And just if you are taking photos and sharing them as part of the course as you go along, please feel free to tag at Libraries NI or use the hashtag Learn at Lunch, and I'll put those in the chat, and we'll circulate those again after the session. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Catriona.
Thank you, Paul. Welcome, everybody. Thanks very much for coming along today for the first Learn at Lunch session. So I'm going to screen share and just do a quick intro to me. Oh, see. And hopefully you can see this okay. If there's any problems with viewing it, just drop it into the chat, okay? So we'll start off just a very quick overview of me, and then we get into the interesting part, which is the detail about how you can take better smartphone portraits. So I am a portrait photographer. I'm based in near Dungannon in County Tyrone, and I primarily would take headshots and work with businesses, small and large, to help promote their business. And I also work with families as well, taking some nice family portraits. And that aside, I like traveling around Ireland, taking just landscape photographs, and you'll find me chasing sunsets and the night sky and taking some aurora photographs. So one of the sessions we're going to cover how to take better photographs using your smartphone of the Northern Lights. So I think it's the last one from memory. So keep an eye for that, and don't forget to register if you haven't already. So just to let you know, I am a member of a number of the different professional bodies, and I've won a number of awards and been shortlisted. This is my most recent one. I was a finalist in the Local Women Awards for Best Mid-Ulster Business. And the training side of my business then is called the Photo Academy NI. And you can rewatch this, and I'll share it in the comments as well. If you want to drop me a follow on Instagram or Facebook for my photography training and photography business. First thing I want to mention though is for anyone who is interested in taking part, I offer a free photo challenge. It's called a 52-week photo challenge, but you can join at any time. So this is the link, and I will include it again when the video goes live onto YouTube in a couple of days, hopefully, that you can sign up. And it's a weekly email that goes out with a topic and lots of tips in there to help you take better photographs. And you can join using a smartphone or a camera. So that's the new challenge just started there at the start of January. Okay, so before we get stuck into portraits specifically, here are a few things just to consider when you are taking a photograph. And this is the first thing that I would say to everyone is, what should every photograph have? And the simple answer is it should have a point of interest, and that is a focal point or a subject. So when someone looks at your photograph, they should know where to look and what they're supposed to be looking at. So once you know what that point of interest is, then if it's a portrait, then it's normally a person's face, or more specifically their eyes. Then you can think about how you can make it stand out. So these are just a few examples of some portraits. So when you look at the photograph, your eye should normally go to the person's face, and there's different ways that you can make the person's face stand out. This also applies to landscape shots, architecture as well. So how can you make your subject stand out then in your photograph? There are a number of different ways you can do this. The first thing is color. So you can have your subject dressed maybe in a different color to the background. So that's important at this time of year where we're based here in the north of Ireland, where we have a lot of browns and not so much green really at this time of year. If you go to a forest, the colours are more muted. So if you are taking photographs of your family or friends outdoors, think about wearing some nice colours that will stand out against the background. You can also then blur the background, and this is what we're going to talk about more specifically today, which is using the portrait mode on your smartphone, and that allows you to blur the background to make your subject stand out. Also think about pattern and texture. So think about where you're taking the photograph. And again, if you were in a forest, maybe where there's lots of twigs or branches, maybe wear something which is more smoother texture to make your subject stand out. And then the last thing is lighting, and lighting is key. It is something that I harp on about in every single one of my classes is light, and light can make or break any photograph, but particularly portraits. So you have to think about lighting and where the light's coming from. And if there isn't enough light, then you can introduce lighting using the flash on your smartphone, or even if you had maybe an artificial light source such as a ring light or one of those smaller LED lights that you can use to help add some light into your portrait. So they are the 4 key ways that you can make your subject stand out. So what do you see when you first look at a photograph? And I'm going to share a photograph here. And I know before anyone says it, it is upside down. It's meant to be upside down for this reason. So when you look at this photograph, I share this at a number of my classes that I teach. And most people tell me that they go to the person's face, and more specifically her mouth area with her teeth. And why is that? It's because that's the brightest part of a photograph. And that's where our eye tends to go to. So same applies in a landscape shot, also upside down. You can see that our eye tends to go to the sun, which is the brightest part of the photo. So think about that when you're taking a photo. And a tip that someone gave me years back is if you turn your phone upside down and look at the photograph, it confuses our brain because we're not sure what we're looking at. And then you can see where does your eye automatically go to. And in a portrait, normally what you're looking for is that it goes to the person's face. So if that is the case, that's good in the photo. And if it's not, then you can think about ways that you can draw the attention to the face. An example I always use is if someone's wearing, say, a white coloured top, and that can, if you're taking photographs outdoors, then that can look a wee bit brighter or a lot brighter than their face. So one of the weeks we're going to look at how to edit your portraits, and we'll cover how you can adjust parts of your photograph to make it brighter or darker. So we'll cover that in more detail in that section. But our eyes tend to go to either the brightest part, the area which is more contrast, or brighter colours. So that's where colour and light, you can see there's a theme here. They are very important in all photographs, but specifically in portraits. So where do you place your subject in the photograph? And that is known as composition. So think about where you're placing them. So when we all start out, I was the same. We tend to put the person right smack bang in the center of the image. And whilst that's fine for certain types of photographs, if you want to start to think more creatively, you could consider placing your subject maybe slightly off to the side. And this depends on whether you're holding your phone like this or like this. But some of you may be familiar with this. On a smartphone, you have, grid lines, which you can turn on, which I'll show you how to do in a wee second. And that is helping you learn how to place your subject, be it a person or thing, better in your photograph. So this guidance rule is known as the rule of thirds. And basically it's 2 lines, horizontal and vertical, where your image is divided up into 9 sort of equal spaces, and they are equally spaced across your image. And the theory is that we should place things which are of interest along either the horizontal or vertical lines, and more specifically, where I've shown you here on the screen, where the yellow circles are at these points. So where those lines intersect, that is a good place or a good spot to place your subject. So in portraits, well, sorry, I'll show you. I think I'm going to show you how to turn these on first. So on your smartphone, if you don't already have this, and by the way, this doesn't show up in the photograph, it's just within the camera app on your smartphone. You can turn on your grid lines. So on Android phones, you do it within the camera app itself. So you go to your camera app, and in the top, normally right-hand corner, there is the menu option, which is the cog icon. And if you click on that, you should have a camera settings menu appears, and then one of the options is known as grid lines or grid. And if you just tap on the wee button beside that, that will turn on your grid lines. Whilst you're in there, if you do have an option which says level, turn that on as well. So it's basically like a spirit level, and it helps you keep your images straight. Not particularly relevant for portraits, but just for maybe landscapes or architecture or groups of people even, it's useful to turn that on. So don't be afraid to turn that on at the same time. On iPhones then, you don't turn this on within the camera app. You go to your main settings app, and then you go to camera, and then you scroll down and turn on grid. And same applies if you have level as an option beside the grid, turn that on, and it helps keep your phone nice and straight when you're taking photos. So in this example here, you can see how I have placed the person's face along the top line and also off to the side. So it's just to take your photographs to the next level, elevate them a wee bit. You're not going to have the person way off to the side, but it's nice just to have them slightly off center, and it gives just a more professional look. And if you have your phone held vertically, then the rule is that you normally place the person's eyes along the top rule of third line. So there are just some general compositional tips which can help improve your images. Now we're going to look more specifically at portraits. We'll start off with self-portraits, and I'm not a huge fan of doing this, but it's nice to take some snaps maybe of yourself if you're out at a location, or just if you have a special event that you've got yourself duty up for. You might want to take a self-portrait. So the key with all portraits, as I mentioned, is good lighting. So find good lighting. If you're indoors, try to go to that you're positioned opposite a window or a light source. But normally if it's daytime, go to a window or a door, a patio door, and face towards that. And then the light comes in, it's known as flat lighting, which means it just lights you more evenly. And that is flattering, and it doesn't show, it helps to minimize any shadows on the face, which is always a good thing for portraits. If you are outdoors, then consider taking photographs if it works out time-wise in the golden hour. And the golden hour is that hour just after sunset and the hour before, the hour just after sunrise and the hour before sunset, where the light is warmer and more soft. So it's a lovely time of day for taking portraits. And the same thing applies, face towards the direction of where the light is coming from. Now, this is something I'm going to tell you about this, but it's not something I tend to do an awful lot. But my daughter, anyone who has, my daughter's 23, well, this was more so when she was maybe in her late teens, where she was telling me about taking portraits, and they know a lot more about it than we do probably. If you are taking a photograph, so on your camera, you'll have your lenses on the rear of it, and then you also have a small lens on the front of the camera, which is facing you where you would normally look at the screen. A lot of the time I would tend to use this, if I'm honest, but the lenses here wouldn't be just as good a quality as the lenses on the rear of your smartphone. So she always used to tell me to put the timer on your phone, which we'll cover, and then turn it around this way. You can see where you are using the rear lenses on your smartphone to take the photograph. Now, I'm telling you to do it, but I find it very difficult. Sometimes if you stand opposite a mirror, you can do it that way, but I'm a great believer in making things easy for myself. So I just tend to use this one on front here, but just thought I would mention that. Yes, and experiment with different angles. So when we're taking photographs, I see people taking them where we're looking down towards the smartphone. That is not the best thing, not very flattering for portraits. So always keep it at least at eye level or slightly above if you're taking a shot. So you can hold it out slightly higher. And this just helps. And again, I'm not saying anybody has double chins, but it's the thing that people tend to ask me a lot is how do we get rid of double chins or create a more flattering look, is holding the phone slightly up. Now, don't hold it too high up, because if you hold it too high up in the air, then you're looking at the bottom of somebody's eyes, which isn't particularly flattering. And think about the background then as well. So depending on where you're taking the photograph. So today, if I'm setting up my Zoom here, I was thinking about the background that was going behind me, what I was wearing, and that helps me stand out from the background. And if you're outdoors, think about backgrounds as well. So you don't maybe want things which are going to detract from the portrait. So think how you can make your subject stand out. Then we'll look at the portrait modes more specifically today, and that's where you can really add that background blur to make separation between your subject and the background. So eyes are the main focal point in every portrait, and we're going to cover this at the end of the session. Hopefully we'll have time, and if not, we'll cover it in another one, where you can tell the phone where you want to focus, and then you can also adjust the exposure, which is the brightness of your image. And it's a very quick tip, but it makes a big difference to all of your photographs. I use it every single time that I take a photograph on my smartphone. So you tap on the screen, and then that tells the smartphone where you want to focus. So if you're taking a portrait, I would tend to touch on the eye on the screen, or even in this general area around the eye level, and that makes sure that your eyes are nicely in focus. And the last thing I would say about self-portraits is don't be afraid to express yourself. Show your personality. If I'm out and about, you'll see these sort of photographs here. I would take a lot. This was actually inside like a sea cave, and I had the phone positioned on the ground, used the timer setting, and then just it's about me jumping around in the air. So that's they are just some tips for general self-portraits. One thing I wanted to mention as well, which can make a big impact on your images, is the lens choice. Now, depending on the type of phone that you have, then you will have a different range of choices here. So on my phone, if you're not sure how many you have, can't see it very well on the back of that cover, but if I take it off here very quickly, you can see that this phone has 3 lenses. Some smartphones have 2, some might have 1, and some might have 4 or 5. It really depends how sophisticated your phone is. If you have an iPhone and it's a pro mode, a pro version of the phone, it normally has 3. Android phones tend to have more. But the default ones would tend to be, you normally have a wide angle lens, which would be 0.5. Then you have your standard lens, which is 1 times, and then you tend to have either a 2 times lens, 3 times, or 5 times lens. The more sophisticated your phone, the more lens choices that you have. So the wide angle lens, the 0.5 version, if I skip forward here, you can see that it tends to change the shape of a person's face if you take a photograph quite close into them. So I would rarely use a 0.5 lens when I'm not close to a subject, because what it does is it distorts facial features. So it pulls the center of the image forward and it pushes the sides back. So the wide angle lens would tend to be better for architecture, landscapes, or larger groups of people where you're in a smaller space, but not good for close-in headshots. If you wanted to try, oh, sorry, I'm skipping forward a bit too much. I would tend to use either the 1-time lens or the 2-time lens, or if you have it, a bigger 3 times, 5 times. The only drawback really of using the larger lens choice is that you have to be further back from your subject for it to be in focus. So if I show you the 3 beside each other, hopefully you can see the difference between the first one, the second, and the third. If I'm just going to jump back here very quickly to this wee bit here. So any lens that's 2 times, 3 times, 5 times is known as a telephoto lens, and that lens actually magnifies what we see sort of with the human eye. So they are flattering for portraits and they don't distort facial features in any way. And as I mentioned, the only drawback is that you have to be further back from your subject to fit them within the screen if you're trying to do a headshot. So they're perfect outdoors where you have lots of space. Where you're in a more confined space indoors, it can be a bit of a struggle. So you might need to use the 1 times lens option. And the other benefit of using the 2 times lens or the 3 times lens is that it also helps, it's known as lens compression. What it does is it gives the appearance that the background is closer to your subject as it makes it bigger. And then it also helps drop it out of focus as well. So on a camera, you would use a telephoto lens for that effect. And the same thing applies on a smartphone camera. How are we doing for time? Just check. So we'll get stuck in the portrait mode then. So portrait mode is available on most smartphones now, and on iPhones, you'll see it as an option along the bottom, and on Android phones, it should be along the bottom as an option. If it isn't there, pop over to more, and then it will bring you up a range of other photo modes, and portrait should be in there. And what portrait mode does is it tries to keep your subject in focus and drop the background out of focus. So once you select the portrait mode, then position your subject within the frame, on the screen, and then it's best to have a clear distinction between your subject and the background to make them stand out, and for portrait mode to engage or to work. And the other thing that's important with portrait mode is that you have good lighting, because if you're in a location where the light is quite low, or outdoors at maybe dusk, or indoors at nighttime, then it tends to not work particularly well. So light is key for portrait mode to work. And don't be afraid to use the flash with portrait mode. I would tend to use that indoors if I was taking photographs, say, of my daughter or one of my cats. Then you can use the portrait mode along with the flash and get good results. So for portrait mode to work, you have to be a certain distance from your subject. You can't be too close or you can't be too far away. And that distance tends to be around 1 meter to 1.5 meters. So if you are too far away from your subject, portrait mode won't work. It will probably still let you take a photograph, but the effects that you can use within portrait mode won't kick in. So on iPhones, then you will know the portrait mode has engaged when, and we'll cover this in a wee second, there's rating along the bottom of the screen which says natural light, and once that turns yellow, that means portrait mode is working. On Android phones, there tends to be an icon on the screen and it will tend to turn yellow to let you know the portrait mode is working. So try that on your phone, experiment and see how you get on, and see if you can master the portrait mode. So we'll start off, I'm breaking this down into two separate sections because it works slightly differently between iPhones and Android. So on iPhones then, you'll see, sorry, I'm going to have to minimize this down. Just so I can see over here. You'll see this lighting here, or this rating which says natural light, and it turns yellow whenever the portrait mode is working. So whenever you are within that distance, the sweet spot, then that will turn yellow to let you know it's working. Then now this will vary again slightly between depending on which type of iPhone that you have, but on the pre-iPhone 16, you would take the photograph in portrait mode and then you could make further adjustments to it after you take the photograph. So you would go to the photo library or the gallery where their images are, click on edit on the image, and then at the top of the screen, it brings up these two options. So it brings up a depth slider, which is where you adjust the background blur, and then you can also adjust the lighting effects that you can use in portrait mode. So you can flick and alternate between these two to show you or to make the adjustments. On the newer models of iPhone, you have a camera control or a button on the side of it, which allows you to set the depth, which is your background blur, before you take the photo as well. So depth relates to a setting on cameras, which is known as aperture, which allows you to blur the background, and it's measured in a thing called f numbers, or in this case here, the depth is known as f. So anytime that you see a small letter F before a number, normally a decimal, know that it's relating to the aperture and the background blur. The smaller that F number, then the more background blur will be evident, and the bigger the F number, so F 1.4, you'll have a very pronounced background blur. F16, both the subject and the background will be in focus. And if you want to check if the photograph was taken and portrait mode was working, if you go in to view it in the gallery, it would say portrait up in the top left-hand corner, and you know then that you can go in and adjust it. So as I showed you here, F 1.4, a strong background blur. F16, you can see the subject and the background is in focus. And then on iPhones, you also have lighting effects, which allow you to, it's basically applies lighting as if you were taking photographs in different types of lighting. So you have your studio lighting, contour lighting, stage light mono, which is black and white, and high key light mono, which is, I'll show you some examples here in a wee second, where it puts either your photograph in black and white or in a spotlight effect. Yeah, so to adjust those, you can adjust the lighting effects at the time you're taking the photograph by moving this icon around on the screen here and selecting the different effects, or you can adjust it afterwards. And okay, sorry, these are some examples. So natural light is the one that I would tend to use a lot. You can use contour lighting for more dramatic type of lighting. Stage light mono converts it to black and white and puts the subject and spotlight effect. And then the high key light mono is where it converts it to black and white and it changes the background to white. Now, sometimes these can be a bit funky, but you can get some creative shots with them. And that's the other thing I should say about portrait mode. On most phones, you can also use portrait mode, not specifically for portraits of people. You can use it for objects as well. The only thing you have to be careful of in portrait mode in general is that if you're, back at the start I said about the background being distinct from the subject, hair tends to, I find, not perform particularly well in portrait mode, and the edges can look a bit funky. So just be mindful of that, but try it on your phone and see how you get on. As I mentioned, you can use it for different subjects, not just people, but you can see how here where things are very fine, it doesn't always tend to work the best. So just try it and see how you get on. So for Android devices then, it's slightly different what you do. On Android devices, you normally have portrait mode as an option, and if you don't, go over, scroll over to the right here where it says more, and portrait should be in there. Again, you need to be around a meter and a half from your subject. And then you can go into the gallery and select a range of background blur to add characters and shapes to your photograph as well. It will have this button here normally, which is your button that you can tap when you're taking the photograph to adjust the level of blur. So blur is depth, the same as on iPhones, and you can just move the slider left or right to make your subject the background more blurred. And some phones, what I have noticed, some Android phones, you don't actually see it at the time when you're taking the photograph, but when you go to view it in the gallery, the blur will have been applied. And then on your models of Android phone as well, you have these studio lighting effects, much like iPhone. So you have the blur option, but you have studio lighting, which brightens the subject. High key mono converts it to a brighter black and white. Low key mono converts it to a darker black and white. You have color backdrop, which applies change to the background color, and then color point. And this, I have to always read these because I forget the difference between them. Color point, then it preserves the color of the subject and it changes the background to black and white. So it's known as color popping, really. So they are some different lighting effects that you can adjust. And then there's the effect strength. Now, because there are many different types of Android phone, what you can do on each phone varies. So you need to go into portrait mode yourself and see what your options are. So the blur effect, you can blur the background. Studio lighting gives you this type of effect. High key mono, black and white. Low key mono was a darker black and white. The backdrop, where it changes it to a gradient color, and then color pop, you can see the subjects in color and the background is black and white. I think I've covered most of that. So just some general portrait tips then. Think about light. So we've talked about that already. Think about where it's coming from. Facing towards the light will give you better light for portraits in general. Think about your background. Is your subject standing out from them more distinctly? Posing tips then, just if you are taking a portrait and your face onto the camera, you will look wider than if you're standing slightly side on. So that's a nice tip, just to turn around to the side. And also, don't be afraid to leave a bit of space around the edges of your photo. This is a common mistake that I see that people make. We're thinking about lighting them, we're thinking about all these different settings on your phone, and we forget then to check that the subject isn't too close to the edge of the image. So always leave a wee bit of space just for the subject to breathe around the edges, and try not to crop at joints, as in crop somebody's hand off. So include hands, include feet if you are doing if you're taking a more full length photograph, and just leave a wee bit of space around the edges. And then if your subject is faced slightly to the side, always leave space for them to breathe and to move into, if that makes sense. So if this image here, if the person was placed over here in the photograph where they're looking out of the photograph, that doesn't look as nice as if there's space for them to look into. Otherwise, it can look a wee bit unbalanced. And another just general tip for portraits then is if you're standing and it's more like a half length or full length shot, just move the arm out from the body slightly, gives it a nicer shape. And hands are funny things in photographs because they tend to look a bit weird if they're just hanging down by somebody's side. So I always give people something to hold in a photograph, or get them to do something like open their arms. It's not like that, but or even like if they're with somebody else, just get them to rub their arms. So if hands are doing things in a photo, it gives them a more natural shape. And lastly, tips, push back. So remember, anything that's closer to the camera looks bigger, anything that's further away looks smaller. So don't be afraid to push your booty back from the camera if you want to make it a bit smaller. And don't be afraid to lean in a wee bit towards the camera with your top half as well. And last thing, just I mentioned it at the start, was about focusing and exposure. So on your phone, if you want to focus, tap on the screen. And when you tap on the screen, that is doing two things. It's telling the phone where to focus. So think about where you are tapping. And then also when you do that, there should be a sun icon which appears close to the focus square or circle, depending if you're iPhone or Android. And that sun icon, so if you tap quickly on the screen and then move your finger up or down on the screen, this makes your image brighter or darker. So it's a great way to focus your image and also very quickly make it brighter or darker. And on Android phones, they have a circle and there's normally a wee padlock in it. So if you tap on the screen, and then depending on your make and model, you may be able to adjust your exposure slightly differently. But normally there's a sun icon or a slider, and you move it either up or down or left or right on your screen to make your image brighter or darker. Just last thing, really important, your lenses, keep them clean, because that makes a big difference to your photographs. For your phone to focus properly, it needs to have contrast. So and when I say contrast, it needs to have light and shade to get a correct focus. So if we tend to have our phones in our pockets or our handbags a lot, and then we get fingerprints on them. So just take a wee cloth, like a glasses case, or if you had something smooth, just give them a wipe. And the same applies to the lens on the front here as well. Remember, that's another lens. Keep it clean, and that will help you then get better focus when you're taking your shots.